Why did no one notice the way she moved? In a room full of uniforms, loud voices, and clattering boots, she slipped between them like silence wearing a body. Her steps were deliberate, her shoulders squared, yet her presence seemed half forgotten, as if the air itself swallowed her whole. Men talked over maps. Officers pointed at screens. Someone cracked a nervous joke that broke against the cold walls and died. She didn't laugh. She walked like a poem written for no one, every step a verse, every breath an unfinished line. And no one asked why she carried herself that way. But there was a reason. It lingered in the shadows of her past, in the things she never said out loud. The briefing was supposed to be routine, an outline of their insertion, their window, their exit. But routine never felt routine to her. Not anymore. Every plan on the wall, every arrow scribbled across the map, carried the weight of lives she had seen extinguished before. She sat near the back. No one reserved the chair for her. They didn't need to, she always chose the corner. The angle of the wall gave her clarity, one view of the room, one view of the door, and enough silence to keep her breathing steady. The commander's voice boomed, but she barely heard it. Not at first. Her mind wandered, not to distraction, but to memory. She saw her brother's face, the way he had looked before boarding his last flight. He promised her he'd be home in 2 weeks. 2 weeks had turned into a folded flag, handed to her by hands that couldn't stop trembling. Her mission tonight wasn't about the orders drawn in blue marker on the board. Not for her. It was about something else, something older, something heavier. But she hadn't told them that, not yet. "Lieutenant." The commander's voice cut through her thoughts. She blinked, straightened. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual. There was doubt in them, maybe concern, maybe something else. "Yes, sir." Her voice was even, too even. "You're with the Overwatch team." Of course she was. Always the one placed high above, far enough away to breathe differently, to see differently, to kill differently. The men around the table nodded. A few whispered. She caught one phrase, cold hands, colder eyes. She pretended not to hear, pretended not to care. But inside something twisted, tired of the way they mistook quiet for emptiness. They never understood that silence was not weakness. Silence was survival. She leaned back in her chair, arms folded. She waited, and as the commander moved on, her gaze drifted once more to the exit door. Out there, somewhere in the dark, someone was waiting for her, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. The plane roared like an unending storm. Inside, the cabin was dim, the red light above casting everyone's faces into strange masks. The men laughed louder than they needed to, slapped each other's shoulders harder than necessary. Fear always wore disguises. Some smoked invisible cigarettes between clenched teeth. Others hummed half-forgotten songs. She sat apart, hands resting on her rifle, eyes half closed. She felt the vibrations of the engines through the metal beneath her boots. Every rumble echoed in her bones like a clock counting down. "Don't you ever talk," a voice shouted over the noise. She opened her eyes. One of the younger soldiers, maybe 21, was staring at her with an uneasy grin. His helmet strap hung loose, chin bare. She wondered if he'd ever seen a body up close. "Sometimes," she answered, her words barely carrying through the roar. The boy chuckled, though it didn't sound like laughter. "Guess that means tonight ain't one of those times." She didn't reply. Instead, she studied him, the freckles across his nose, the way his fingers trembled slightly as he checked his gear. She saw herself in him, not the person she was now, but the girl she had been once. The one who thought training prepared you for death. The one who thought missions ended cleanly. She almost wanted to tell him, to lean close and whisper, "You won't ever be the same after tonight. None of us will." But the words stayed locked behind her teeth. Warnings never helped. Some things had to be learned in silence. The green light snapped on. No more time, no more pretending. The plane's belly opened. Air rushed in like 1,000 knives. One by one, they disappeared into the black sky, swallowed by the night. Her turn came. She stepped forward steady. No hesitation, she leapt. And for a few eternal seconds, she was weightless. The ground rose like a secret being revealed. Her parachute snapped open, yanking her hard enough to bruise. Wind howled. The world below stretched out in muted grays and shadows, fields, broken villages, a thin line of road like a scar cutting across the land. She guided herself toward the ridge where Overwatch would set up. Alone, higher, distant, always distant. The others landed miles ahead. Their boots hit soil with heavy purpose. Her boots found rocks sharp and uneven. She rolled, hit, rose quickly. Nothing broken, nothing torn, only her silence intact. The night air smelled of dirt and cold iron. She pulled her rifle close, scanning the horizon. Somewhere in that darkness lay their target, a compound with walls too high, doors too guarded, and inside it, men who thought they were safe, men who had taken more than they ever had the right to. She breathed slowly, listening. Crickets, the low moan of wind, and beneath it faintly the echo of voices carried by distance. She crouched, adjusted her scope, found her place in the story. And waited. Hours crawled. Through her scope she saw shadows move, saw her team crawl, sprint, pause. She counted every step, every mistake, every whisper of danger they didn't notice. That was her role, to see what others couldn't. But in the stillness, memories pressed against her chest. The smell of burned fuel, the cries she couldn't unhear, the last phone call she never answered because she thought she had more time. She shifted slightly, throat tight. Her finger brushed the trigger. Down below, the young soldier, the boy with freckles, was signaling. His movements were too wide, too obvious. He didn't know how much noise silence could make. She whispered under her breath, though he couldn't hear her. Smaller, quieter, don't let them see you. But the world had its own plans. A sudden burst of gunfire cracked the night. Her chest clenched. Her scope found the flash. Two guards on the wall shouting, scrambling. The compound was awake. Her breath slowed, time stretched. She pulled the trigger, once, twice. Two shadows fell. The night swallowed their cries. But it wasn't enough. Lights flared in the compound. Sirens wailed. The mission had changed. And as she reloaded, steady and unshaken, one thought rose above all others. This is only the beginning. The voices in her earpiece were chaos, shouting, demands, fear hidden behind urgency. She tuned them out, kept her eyes on her scope, her mind on the angles. Every shot she took was a shield for the ones moving below. Every second she bought was a chance for someone else to breathe longer. But deep inside, beneath the steel of her focus, another voice whispered. It wasn't command, it wasn't strategy. It was her brother's voice. You can't save everyone. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes blurred for a second before she forced them clear. Not tonight, she whispered. And she fired again. What happens when silence isn't enough? The first shots had been clean, precise, but silence, once broken, doesn't return easily. Through her scope she saw the compound awake in chaos, doors slamming, lights sparking to life, boots pounding against stone. The target was stirring too quickly, too aware. Her earpiece crackled. Overwatch report. She didn't answer right away. Her finger steadied against the trigger, adjusting to the movement of shadows. One shot dropped another guard before his alarm could rise into words. Only then did she breathe. Overwatch holding, 4 down, more coming. Static swallowed her response. Then the commander's voice broke through, sharp, commanding, stay on them, we're pushing inside. She exhaled through her nose. They always spoke as if it were that simple, as if stepping through a door only meant choosing to walk. They didn't feel what she felt, sitting alone on a ridge, watching the storm unfold below. They didn't know the weight of deciding who lived long enough to see another sunrise. And still she carried that weight. The boy with freckles moved with the others, pressed close to the wall. His helmet finally snugged down against his chin. He was learning too quickly. Fear had taught him in one night what training had failed to teach in months. She tracked him through the glass, not as a soldier, but as something fragile she refused to let the world shatter. She remembered when she'd been him, the first mission, the first kill, the way the world cracked and never sealed again. Her breath caught, she blinked hard, and she almost missed it. Movement. A figure slipped along the compound's second wall, crouched low, faster than the others. Not a guard, not one of theirs, something else. Her scope tightened. The figure was armed, moving toward her team, too close. Her jaw locked, her finger moved. The shot rang. The figure crumpled, soundless. But when the body rolled, she froze. It wasn't a soldier, not in uniform, not in armor. A civilian. Her breath hitched sharp, sticking in her chest. She pulled back from the scope, throat tightening. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Had she seen wrong? Had the light tricked her? She pressed her eye back against the glass. The face was still there, young, terrified, not even holding the weapon right. The world tilted. She felt sick. The voice in her earpiece dragged her back. Overwatch, cover us. She swallowed hard, forcing her lungs to move. Her hands trembled for a fraction of a second before she gripped the rifle harder, grounding herself in steel. One mistake. That was all it took to remind her of everything she wanted to forget. Her brother's voice echoed again, cruel and soft at the same time. You can't save everyone. And she hated how true it was. The team breached the compound wall. Explosions barked, muffled by stone. She shifted position, climbed higher on the ridge, ignoring the screaming in her chest. If she kept moving, if she kept her scope steady, maybe her hands wouldn't betray her. Down below, the night turned ugly. Muzzle flashes erupted from windows. Grenades shook the air. She tracked every target she could, firing with mechanical precision. One fell. Another. She lost count. Numbers stopped mattering when you were trading time instead of lives. Through it all, the boy with freckles kept moving. She couldn't stop watching him. At one point he froze in the doorway, shoulders trembling, his rifle clutched too tight. She whispered, though he couldn't hear, "Breathe, just breathe." And somehow he did. He stepped forward. He vanished inside. Her chest tightened again. She remembered whispering the same thing to her brother once before his final mission. Just breathe. He never came back. Minutes stretched like hours. The team's voices rose and fell in her earpiece. Commands, curses, the occasional broken gasp. Then a different sound cut through, a scream. High-pitched, sharp, not one of theirs. Her stomach dropped. She swung her scope toward the far corner of the compound. A door had burst open. Two figures stumbled out, one dragging the other, a small frame, struggling, bare feet scraping against stone. A child. She blinked hard, couldn't look away. The smaller figure was yanked back inside before she could even exhale. The door slammed shut. And suddenly, the mission wasn't just about walls or guards or orders drawn in blue ink hours ago. It was about something else entirely, something raw, something she couldn't ignore. Her earpiece buzzed, Overwatch status. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on that door. The firefight dragged on, her rifle sang its steady rhythm, but her thoughts kept circling back, pulling her apart from inside. A civilian dead by her hand, a child inside the compound, her brother's absence pressing like a bruise that would never fade. Her silence had always been her armor. Tonight, it felt like her punishment. For a moment, she thought about turning off the radio, about walking away, disappearing into the night. No one would notice. No one would stop her. She could vanish the way her brother had, become another ghost in a war full of them. But then she saw the boy again, freckles glinting under a flash of light, his shoulders hunched but still moving, still fighting. Too young, too human. And she realized something bitter, something sharp. If she left, he would die. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And she couldn't stomach the thought of another folded flag, not for someone else's sister, not again. Her hand steadied, her lungs found rhythm. Not yet, she thought, not while I'm still breathing. The compound fell quiet too suddenly. Gunfire slowed, voices dimmed. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals under the moonlight. She scanned every shadow, waiting for the ambush, for the surprise. But the silence deepened instead. Target secured, the commander's voice finally announced, breathless, heavy. Relief rippled in the background chatter, laughter edged with exhaustion, a few muttered prayers. But not hers. Her scope stayed locked on that door. Because she knew. The mission was over for them, but not for her. There was still something inside that compound, something that mattered more than the orders on the wall. And she couldn't walk away. Not yet. The team began pulling out. One by one, they vanished back into the night, their shapes swallowed by distance. The boy with freckles glanced up at the ridge before leaving, as if he knew she'd been watching. His eyes met hers for just a second, uncertain, searching. Then he was gone. She remained, alone again, rifle across her lap, heart beating too loud in the silence. The door below stayed shut. She whispered to herself, so softly even the night might not hear. "I'm not finished." Her brother's voice echoed back, a ghost she carried. "You can't save everyone." Her jaw tightened. "Maybe not," she murmured, "but I can try." And with that she rose. She left the ridge. She began walking toward the compound. Every step heavy, every breath another unfinished line. She walked like a poem in war. And this was only the second verse. What kind of person walks back into fire when everyone else is walking out? Her boots crunched against the gravel path, each step louder than it should have been. The night was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet of things waiting to break. The compound stood before her, scarred from gunfire, smoke curling from cracks in the walls. To most, it looked like a ruin. To her, it was unfinished. The ridge was behind her now. Safety was behind her. Ahead lay the weight of a choice no one had ordered her to make. She reached the wall, pressed her palm flat against its rough surface. The stone was still warm from the firefight, radiating heat like a pulse. For a second, she closed her eyes. Her brother's face appeared again, clear, cruel, and kind all at once. "Don't go where you don't have to." That's what he'd told her once, years ago, when they were both young and pretending war was a place you could choose to enter or avoid. She smiled bitterly. She had never listened to him then. Why would she start now? The door loomed ahead, the same one she had watched through her scope, the same one that swallowed the child whole. She touched the handle. It was cold. She pulled it open. The inside stank of cordite, sweat, and old wood. The air was heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Shadows leaned long against the cracked floor. A single bulb swung above, creaking on its cord. Her rifle moved before she did, barrel sweeping corners, eyes flicking where the scope couldn't reach. She stepped slow, deliberate, the way she always did. Blood smeared the walls in streaks. Bullet holes scarred the plaster. A boot lay discarded near the stairwell, empty but not forgotten. She swallowed hard, the silence pressed closer. She whispered to herself, the way she always did when the silence got too loud, one step at a time. Her voice steadied her, even when no one else was there to hear it. The first room was empty. So was the second. But emptiness never comforted her. She learned long ago that emptiness only meant you hadn't yet found what you were supposed to. At the third door, she hesitated. A sound leaked through, soft, fragile, a whimper. Her chest tightened, she gripped the handle. Slowly she pushed. The door creaked open. Inside was a girl, no older than 8. Knees pulled to her chest, bare feet dirty, hair matted against her face. Wide eyes shone in the dim light, too large for a body so small. And in her tiny hands, a pistol. Her heart cracked against her ribs. The girl's hands shook so violently the barrel wavered. Her lips trembled, but no words came. For a second the soldier didn't move. Her rifle hovered midair, heavy and cold. The girl's eyes reflected in her scope, two moons trembling with fear. She exhaled slowly, lowered her rifle an inch, then another. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered. Her voice cracked the silence like glass breaking gently. The girl flinched. Her finger twitched on the pistol's trigger. The soldier froze, raising her free hand slightly, palm open. "Easy," she murmured. "It's too heavy for you, I know." Her throat tightened as she said it, because she remembered saying almost the same words to her brother once, when they were young, training in secret, before either of them understood what heavy really meant. The girl's eyes welled. The pistol sagged, lowering by inches until it clattered softly against the floor. The soldier let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She stepped closer, slow as rain falling. The girl whispered something then, words in a language the soldier only half understood, but the meaning was clear. "Please don't leave me." Her heart twisted. She knelt, bringing herself level with the child. She didn't touch her, not yet. She only said, "I won't." The girl's small hand clutched the fabric of her sleeve as if to anchor herself. And suddenly, the soldier wasn't in that ruined room anymore. She was in a kitchen, years ago, watching her brother's little girl, her niece, cling to his uniform the same way before he left for deployment. The soldier swallowed hard, memory blurred with present stinging her eyes. The niece had never clung to her, not after, not when the folded flag came, not when the funeral ended. She had stood apart, silent, blamming eyes burning holes she never forgot. The soldier blinked the memory away. This girl wasn't her niece. This girl didn't know her brother, but the grip felt the same, the plea felt the same. And she knew in that moment that she could not leave. A noise upstairs snapped her back. Heavy, deliberate, not a child. She stiffened, lifted her rifle again. The girl whimpered, pulling tighter against her. The soldier whispered quickly, "Hide." She pointed under the desk. The girl obeyed without hesitation, crawling small into the shadows. The soldier rose, rifle ready, feet silent. She moved toward the stairs. The second floor was worse. The stench hit first rotten iron, then the sight. A row of cots stained dark, shackles bolted to walls. A lantern burned low in the corner, casting grotesque shadows. And in the middle of it, a man. Thick shoulders, beard wild, rifle slung carelessly as he dug through a crate. She raised her weapon, but something stopped her finger. Not mercy, not hesitation. Recognition. His face. She knew it. It slammed into her chest like a sledgehammer. Not because he was someone important, not because he was famous. Because she had seen that face before. In a photograph her brother once showed her. This man had been there. In the same platoon. He had come back. Her brother hadn't. Her hands trembled. She lowered the scope, blinked, then raised it again. The face was still there. Her chest roared with questions she couldn't speak. Why him? Why not her brother? What had he seen? What had he done? She exhaled, steadying herself. She couldn't afford this. Not now. But the past didn't care about timing. The man turned, sensing something. His eyes locked with hers. Surprise widened them. His hand jerked toward his weapon. Her finger tightened. The rifle cracked. He dropped. The lantern flickered, shadows leaping across the walls. She stood still, chest heaving, rifle smoking. But the questions didn't fall with him. They grew louder. Downstairs, the girl whimpered again. The soldier blinked, forcing her feet to move. She descended, grabbed the child gently, and whispered, "We're leaving." The girl nodded, eyes wet, fingers digging into her sleeve. They stepped back into the night. The compound loomed behind them, broken, burning, but the soldier didn't look back. She couldn't, because she knew what the others didn't. The mission wasn't about the compound. It was about everything it held. Ghost questions, lives half-lived. And as she carried the child through the night, she realized she wasn't just running from the place. She was running from the answers she wasn't ready to face. The ridge was dark and empty now. The team was gone. The silence was hers again. She crouched, pulling the girl close, whispering, "You're safe." But even as she said it, she wondered if safety was a word that meant anything anymore. The girl leaned into her chest, small breath shaking. The soldier stroked her tangled hair, eyes on the horizon. And in the quiet, her brother's voice came again. "You can't save everyone." She closed her eyes, jaw tight. "Then I'll save who I can," she whispered. And as the sun began bleeding faint light into the edges of the sky, she knew her war was no longer just the mission. It was the poem she kept writing with her steps. And the next verse had only begun. The city was burning when the order finally came down. Not in the cinematic sense, no towering infernos or Hollywood explosions, but in the slow, deliberate unraveling of stone, steel, and soul. Buildings bled smoke, the streets cracked with artillery strikes, and the once proud flags of the Republic hung tattered from shattered poles. Every soldier knew the truth now. This wasn't just another defensive action. This was the line. Hold here and the enemy would break. Fail here, and there would be no tomorrow worth remembering. Captain Alina Vey stood in the command tent, her face illuminated by the flicker of failing screens. Reports poured in from every flank, each more desperate than the last. Ammunition was running low. Morale was thinning. Reinforcements were a whisper that had long since faded into silence. The city wasn't just burning, it was suffocating. And through it all, Alina barely spoke. She didn't need to. In every war she'd fought, she had discovered something unsettling. The louder a commander shouted, the more uncertain they were. True strength wasn't in volume, it was in presence. And her presence, quiet, steady, immovable, was the thread holding her soldiers together when everything else was unraveling. The battle shifted. The enemy's artillery hammered closer. Each strike shook the earth. Each shockwave made the tent walls ripple. Officers flinched. A few younger soldiers whispered their fears aloud. The maps on the table were a mess of red marks, so cluttered with enemy movements that it was almost pointless to track them anymore. "We can't hold this sector another hour," Lieutenant Brand muttered, staring at the map as if willing it to change. "They're pushing us back from the east and the north simultaneously. If we don't fall back now, they'll overrun us," another officer cut in, his voice cracking. "We need to regroup, save what's left of the battalion." All eyes turned toward Alina. She didn't slam her fist on the table. She didn't bark an order. She simply looked at the lines, then at her soldiers. Her eyes, dark, steady, did the work her voice didn't need to. The silence stretched, carrying weight heavier than any shouted command. Finally she spoke, calm, even, almost too quiet for the room. "We hold." It wasn't bluster, it wasn't denial, it was certainty. The words settled into her officers like anchors. A few faces tightened, jaws clenched, fear replaced by a sharper, steadier edge. Others still looked uncertain, but no one dared argue, because Alina never spoke without reason. The step forward. The truth was simple. They could not hold with conventional tactics. The enemy had numbers, artillery, and momentum. The Republic forces had grit, but grit could only carry them so far without blood to fuel it. And Alina knew where that blood would come from. She stepped outside the tent. The world greeted her with fire and smoke. Barrages lit up the skyline. Civilians, trapped within the collapsing city, ran for cover wherever cover still existed. Amidst it all, her soldiers, dirty, exhausted, many of them barely out of their teenage years, looked to her. They always did. Alina adjusted her rifle strap, tightened the glove on her right hand, and started walking toward the eastern barricade. Quiet, purposeful, no fanfare, no speeches, just one step, then another. The sound of her boots against the broken pavement seemed louder than the distant thunder of artillery. And slowly, soldiers began to follow. Defining service. There are two kinds of leaders in war. The ones who stand above, directing from safety, and the ones who step into the fire first, not because they want to, but because they know someone has to. Alina had never asked for glory. She never wanted medals or statues. Service to her was something quieter. It wasn't about being remembered. It was about giving everything so others might live, even if no one ever knew your name. That was why she never raised her voice, why she never demanded recognition, why, even now, as she took her position at the barricade, she didn't announce herself with speeches. She simply raised her rifle and began to fire. And the men and women around her followed, not because she ordered them to, but because her very presence was a command. The push. The enemy came in waves, black-armored soldiers pouring through the smoke, their weapons cutting through the rubble. The barricade shuddered under the assault. Bullets snapped the air, grenades tore holes into the ground, and screams pierced the chaos. Alina was there through it all. Quiet, steady. She moved like water between positions, firing with precision, pulling wounded soldiers back, pressing fresh magazines into trembling hands. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Every action was deliberate, every gesture a reminder that she was still there, and as long as she was still there, so were they. "Captain, on the line," someone shouted down the barricade. And suddenly, men who moments ago were breaking under fear found themselves holding just a little longer. Their arms burned, their ears rang, their hearts hammered, but they held. Because she was holding. The sacrifice. Hours blurred into each other. The eastern barricade became a graveyard of shattered stone and burned-out armor. The Republic line was thinning but not broken. Not yet. Then came the moment. An enemy armored transport broke through, rolling over the barricade with crushing force. Its turrets swung, belching fire that tore soldiers apart in seconds. Panic rippled through the line. Retreat was seconds away from collapse. Alina saw it. She didn't shout, she didn't curse, she didn't even hesitate, she just stepped forward, quiet, purposeful. With calm precision, she stripped a charge from her belt, sprinted through the open fire, and vaulted onto the transport. Bullets snapped past her head. The machine rocked under her weight. For one suspended heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Then detonation. The transport erupted, flames spewing into the air. The shockwave knocked soldiers flat, enemy and ally alike. When the smoke cleared, the burning wreck lay silent, and Alina stood atop it, rifle raised, eyes blazing not with rage but with resolve. The line roared back to life. The cost. But war doesn't let heroes walk away untouched. Alina's arm was bleeding. Shrapnel had torn through her side. Her body screamed at her to stop, to fall, to give in. But she didn't. She climbed down from the wreck, rejoined her soldiers, and kept fighting. Because service wasn't about surviving. It was about giving every last breath you had if it meant someone else could take another. Her steps grew slower, her breaths heavier, but she never faltered, quiet, steady, defining not through noise but through sacrifice. And her soldiers saw, they knew. Even if they couldn't put it into words, they felt it. This was what true service meant. Not speeches, not medals, not survival. But the quiet step forward into fire, when everyone else was too afraid to move. The voiceover close. History remembers the loud, the speeches, the shouts, the rallies, but history often forgets the quiet, the step that no one notices until it changes everything. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Her silence defined her. Her service consumed her, and her sacrifice became the line upon which everything else held. Sometimes, true leadership is not in how loudly you command, but in how quietly you walk forward, into fire, into fear, into the place no one else dares go. That is where service is born. That is where sacrifice becomes legend. The fires of battle faded into embers. Not because the war was over, but because exhaustion had drained even the sound of violence into a muted hum. The eastern barricade still stood, barely. Charred concrete and blood-stained steel marked the ground where dozens had fallen. Smoke curled upward like ghosts rising from the ruins. And through it all, Captain Alina Vey stood, leaning against the shattered remains of the transport she had destroyed. Her uniform was soaked in blood, some hers, most not. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were heavy, but she was still upright. Her soldiers found her like that, not yelling, not boasting, not celebrating, just standing, quiet, watchful. And in that silence, they understood something they hadn't before. The first whisper. The younger soldiers gathered first. Their faces were pale, their hands trembling from adrenaline that hadn't yet faded. They looked at her the way survivors look at the only thing keeping them tethered to reality. One soldier, barely more than a boy, stepped forward. His rifle dangled uselessly at his side. His lips moved, but no words came out. Finally, in a voice cracked and raw, he whispered, "You didn't have to do that, Captain." Alina turned her head slightly. Her expression didn't change. She didn't answer. Because she knew the truth, she did have to. If she hadn't stepped forward, the line would have collapsed. If she hadn't taken that quiet step into fire, every soldier here would be dead. Her silence wasn't denial, it was acknowledgement. She carried their survival not as a victory, but as a weight. The boy didn't press further. He simply nodded, as though her silence said more than words ever could. Command's response. Hours later, when the smoke thinned and the survivors had reformed their positions, a transmission broke through the static. It was High Command. Their voices were crisp, detached, filled with the sterility of distance. They congratulated Alina's unit for holding the line. They promised commendations, recognition, medals for bravery. Her officers glanced at her, waiting for her reaction. But Alina only nodded once, then cut the channel. Medals, recognition. What weight did those things carry in comparison to the lives buried beneath the rubble? What good was a medal to a mother who would never see her child again? To a soldier who had given his last breath for a line on a map? No, true service wasn't about being decorated. It was about being forgotten so others could live. Her silence again said everything. The wounded. The night was filled with the groans of the wounded. Makeshift medical tents were erected among the rubble. Bandages ran out within an hour. Morphine even faster. Soldiers lay on stretchers with wide, unblinking eyes, whispering names of loved ones that might never hear them again. Alina moved among them, slowly, steadily. She didn't speak. She didn't promise survival she couldn't guarantee. She simply knelt by each soldier, pressing a hand to their shoulder, letting them know they weren't alone. And in the silence, the wounded found comfort. Because silence could be terrifying, but in Alina's presence it became a blanket, a shield, proof that someone strong was still there. When one soldier cried out, begging for a medic, Alina herself took the bloodied gauze and bound the wound. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't even skilled in medicine. But her hands were steady, and that steadiness mattered more than skill in that moment. The soldier's breathing slowed. His eyes softened. And though he would not live till morning, he died with her hand on his in silence. That was her gift, not speeches, not false hope, but presence. Officers in disagreement. Later, in the ruins of a half-collapsed government hall, her officers argued again. "We can't keep this up," Lieutenant Brand insisted, slamming his fist against the wall. "The eastern barricade held today, but tomorrow, the day after, will break. We have to retreat before the enemy makes the choice for us." Another officer countered, "And if we retreat, the civilians die. This city is already half rubble. If we abandon them, it's over." Voices rose, anger sharpened, fear fueled every word. And through it all, Elena said nothing. Finally, when silence fell awkward, heavy, they turned to her. "What do you say, Captain?" Brand demanded. She met his eyes, calm, unshaken. Then she simply shook her head once. Not retreat, not surrender. The decision was made, not with words, not with speeches, but with a quiet refusal to abandon the people who still trusted them. The officers fell silent, because in her silence they found their answer. The letter. That night Elena sat alone in the corner of the ruined hall, a dim lamp flickering beside her. In her hand was a small, battered datapad. On it, an unsent letter. It wasn't addressed to command. It wasn't a tactical report. It was a message to her younger sister, back on the homeworld, far away from the front. Elena typed slowly, carefully. "I don't know if this will reach you. Maybe it won't. Maybe it's better if it doesn't. I want you to know something, not about me, but about what it means to serve. Service isn't about medals or ranks. It isn't about being remembered. It's about stepping forward when no one else will. It's about silence, not because you're afraid, but because you know the act matters more than the words. If I don't come back, don't let them turn me into a story of glory. Remember me only as someone who tried to protect what little could be protected." She paused, stared at the blinking cursor, then deleted the last sentence. Because she knew her sister wouldn't remember her as someone who tried. She'd remember her as a sister, and that was enough. Elena set the datapad aside, her face unreadable, her silence once again carrying more weight than any word could. A soldier's reflection. The boy who had whispered to her earlier found her again before dawn. His uniform was torn, his hands stained with soot, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. He sat across from her, hesitant at first. Then he spoke softly. "When I saw you step forward, when you climbed onto that transport, I thought you were insane. I thought you were throwing your life away. But then you survived. And now, I don't know what to make of it. Did you do it because you wanted to be a hero, or because you couldn't stand to watch us fail?" Elena didn't answer. The boy nodded. "Yeah, that's what I thought. You don't do it for glory. You do it because it's what needs to be done. I hope someday I can be that brave." He looked down at his hands. "But I don't think I'm like you. I'm too scared." For the first time, Elena spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's stepping forward anyway." Then she fell silent again. The boy looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened his back. Something inside him had changed. Not because of what she said, but because of who she was. The night sky was fractured with smoke. Ash drifted like snow across the ruins. The silence between battles was not peace. It was only the breath before another strike. At 300 hours, the scouts returned with news. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. Heavier armor, reinforced infantry, air support. Everything that hadn't yet been thrown at this broken city was on the way. The officers gathered again, their faces pale, their voices hushed. "This isn't defense anymore," one muttered. "This is a siege. They mean to erase us." Another whispered, "Then we won't last the week." But still in the center of it all, Captain Elena Vey remained silent, listening, watching, measuring every word. Why didn't she speak? Why didn't she rally them with promises or lies? Because she knew words couldn't hold walls together. Actions could. Choices could. And in war, silence was sometimes the sharpest blade. The plan they didn't want. At first light, she rose. The officers straightened automatically, expecting orders. But she didn't give them. Instead, she spread a battered map across a cracked stone table, lines scrawled in fading ink, enemy routes marked in red, their own dwindling positions marked in blue. She drew a finger down the river that cut through the city's heart. Then she tapped the broken bridge, one of the last intact structures left. No words, just a gesture. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "You want to hold the bridge?" Lieutenant Brand asked, his voice tight. She looked at him, a single nod. Brand's jaw clenched. "It's suicide." "Silence." Another officer slammed his fist against the table. "The bridge is nothing, Captain. It's rubble. We should consolidate what's left of our defenses, not die for stone." But Alina didn't move. She simply pointed again. To the bridge. To the artery that, if severed, would choke the enemy advance. Finally, Bran exhaled and muttered, "She's right. If they take the bridge, the city falls within hours." The officers fell into silence. Her silence had beaten them. "March to the bridge." The company moved at dawn. Ash crunched under their boots. The city was a skeleton of its former self, windows shattered, towers cracked, streets littered with memories no one dared to pick up. Civilians watched them pass, mothers clutching children, old men leaning on sticks, eyes hollow yet clinging to one fragile thread of hope. One girl, no older than 12, stepped forward and held out a wilted flower. She placed it in Alina's hand without a word. Alina looked down at the flower, at the trembling hand that had given it. Then she tucked it into her vest pocket. No speeches, no promises, just a quiet gesture that told the child her gift had been received. And somehow that was enough. The soldiers noticed. They didn't march louder, but their steps grew firmer. Because sometimes hope didn't need trumpets. It only needed someone willing to carry it silently. Holding the line. They reached the bridge by noon. What had once been a proud stone arch was now fractured, patched with steel beams and sandbags. Beneath it, the river churned black with ash and oil. The enemy came at dusk. First artillery, the ground shook. Shrapnel screamed through the air. Soldiers ducked, covered, prayed. Alina stood exposed, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Then came the infantry. Dozens, then hundreds pouring through the smoke. The bridge erupted in gunfire. Rifles cracked. Machine guns roared. Grenades lit the sky in bursts of orange flame. Through it all, Alina walked the line. Silent, calm. She placed a hand on shoulders, adjusted a rifle barrel by an inch, refilled an empty magazine. Not a word. And yet in her silence the soldiers felt steadier. The chaos lessened. The fear softened. They fought harder, not because she told them to, but because she was there. The break. Hours passed. The bridge was still theirs, but barely. The enemy pressed harder, wave after wave. The soldiers were exhausted. Ammunition was dwindling. At one point, Brand staggered up to her, blood streaking down his arm. "We can't hold much longer," he shouted over the roar. "We need to pull back before they overrun us." Alina turned to him. Her face was pale, streaked with soot, but her eyes were steady. She said nothing. Brand clenched his teeth. "Damn it, say something." But she didn't. She simply raised her rifle and fired into the smoke. Her silence was her answer. Brand stared at her. Then with a broken laugh he shook his head. "Fine, we hold." He turned and rallied the men, not with speeches, but with her silence echoing in his chest. A glimpse of fear. And yet, even Alina wasn't unbreakable. In a rare moment, as the sky burned red and enemy shadows advanced, she ducked behind cover. Her hands trembled. Her breathing quickened. For the first time, fear cracked through her mask. Not for herself, but for them. The boy soldier, the same one who had once confessed his fear, crawled beside her. He saw it. He saw her hands shaking. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, she wasn't Captain Vey. She was just Alina, tired, human, afraid. And in that raw honesty, something shifted in him. He reached out, gripped her hand. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he whispered, repeating her own words back to her. "It's stepping forward anyway." Her breath hitched, but she nodded slowly. And then she rose again, her rifle in hand, stepping into fire. Because silence didn't mean she had no fear. It meant she carried it for them. The push. As night deepened, the enemy brought armor. Tanks rolled forward, their cannons tearing chunks from the bridge. Soldiers faltered, fear rising again. But Alina climbed onto the rubble, standing exposed against the night sky. She raised a signal flare, one of their last. A streak of red arced upward. Within seconds, mortars hidden on the far bank thundered to life. Shells rained down, slamming into enemy armor. One tank exploded, then another. The enemy line staggered. The soldiers roared, not with words but with fire. They surged forward, pushing the enemy back step by step. And Alina, she stood tall in silence, the flare's smoke curling around her like a shroud. Aftermath. By dawn, the bridge still stood, broken, scarred, but theirs. The soldiers collapsed where they stood, too tired to cheer, too numb to weep. Alina lowered herself to the ground at last. Her body was heavy, her wounds burning, her throat dry from hours of smoke. The boy soldier limped to her side, his face smeared with ash, his eyes wide with something between awe and relief. "You never said a word," he whispered. Alina turned her head, looking at him, her lips curved just slightly. "Words," her voice was raw, cracked, "are what hold bridges." Then she fell quiet again. The city had stopped breathing. At least that's how it felt. After the bridge battle, there was no cheering, no celebration, just silence. The kind of silence that came when exhaustion outweighed even relief. The bridge had held, but everyone knew what it meant. The enemy would not forgive. They would come back, stronger, angrier, with enough firepower to make the last fight look like a rehearsal. And for Captain Alina Vey, that knowledge pressed against her chest like a weight she could no longer set down. The enemy massing. Scouts brought grim reports. Across the river, the enemy had begun assembling siege engines, rocket batteries, and heavy armor. Columns stretched back for miles. "They're preparing to erase us," Bran muttered, staring at the maps. "Not just take the city, turn it into ash." Alina studied the marks in silence. She knew Bran was right, and she knew what command would order if given the chance. Abandon the city, retreat, preserve what forces they could. But abandoning wasn't an option. Too many civilians were still here. Thousands huddled in basements, old subway lines, broken churches. They had no ships, no roads clear enough to flee. Retreat would mean leaving them behind. Alina couldn't do that. Not again, not ever. The choice she did speak. Late that night, she walked the broken streets alone. Her boots crunched over shattered glass, past graffiti half covered in ash, past the husks of cars still smoldering. The city wasn't just ruins. It was memory, families, dreams, children who once played on sidewalks now stained with blood. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was mourning, every step a quiet vow. At the edge of a ruined square, she stopped, looked up at the stars barely visible through smoke. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the weight of the choice settle. She knew what needed to be done. She knew the cost. But she wouldn't tell them, not yet. Some burdens a commander carried alone. The soldiers feel it. Her men felt it, even without words. They watched her more closely, noticed the way she lingered at the medical tents longer than usual, the way she touched the walls of buildings as though memorizing them, the way her gaze held just a second too long when she looked at each of them. The boy soldier whispered to another, "She's different, like she's saying goodbye without saying it." Bran heard. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, because he'd noticed it too. Commanders made choices, but sometimes those choices looked a lot like sacrifices. The final plan. At dawn, she gathered her officers at the bridge again. The air was cold, the sky iron gray. She spread the map out, her hands steady. She marked the enemy positions with charcoal strokes, their own dwindling supplies, their fragile defenses. Then she drew a circle around the bridge, a single clear mark. Bran frowned. "You're not suggesting." She looked at him, silence. His throat worked, blowing the bridge with us on it. The others shifted, muttering panicked. Finally, Alina spoke. Her voice was low, even. We can't hold forever, but we can hold long enough to collapse the crossing, long enough to choke their advance. If we fall, the city survives. The civilians survive. Command has time to send reinforcements. Her words hung heavy. One officer spat, "That's not a plan, that's suicide." Alina didn't argue. She simply folded the map, tucked it beneath her arm, and walked away. Because sometimes the truth didn't need debate. It just needed doing. The night before. That night was different. Soldiers didn't sleep. They talked quietly among themselves, telling stories they'd never shared before. A sister's wedding, a dog left behind, a song their mother used to hum when the storms came. Alina walked among them, listening, not speaking. When the boy soldier saw her, he asked softly, "Do you ever regret it, choosing this life?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally, "Every day." He blinked, surprised. She met his eyes. "And yet I choose it again, because regret is a wound, but abandoning you would be death." Then she fell silent. The boy swallowed hard, understanding more in that moment than any speech could ever give him. The last stand. Dawn broke with fire. The enemy came in force, their shells raining down, shaking the very bones of the city. The bridge shuddered with every impact. Soldiers braced themselves, teeth clenched, hearts racing. Alina moved through them like a shadow, calm, steady, a hand here, a nod there. When the first wave hit, the bridge roared with gunfire. The soldiers fought like demons, not because they believed they would live, but because she was with them. Every time they faltered, her presence steadied them. Every silence of hers was louder than the enemy's thunder. But the pressure mounted, the lines wavered, the enemy surged closer. And Alina knew the moment had come. The signal. She climbed onto the highest point of rubble. Gunfire cracked around her. Shouts rose like waves. She pulled the flare from her vest pocket, the same pocket where the wilted flower still rested. Red light streaked upward, cutting through the smoke. The engineers below triggered the charges. The bridge shuddered, stone cracked, metal groaned. The soldiers stared in shock as the ground beneath them began to fall. "Alina," Bran roared, "get back." But she didn't move. She stood tall, watching the enemy line buckle as the bridge collapsed into the river, taking their armor, their infantry, their fury with it. Her soldiers scrambled, some pulled to safety, others lost in the collapse. Chaos consumed the moment. And through it all, Alina remained. Silent, steady, choosing to be the weight that tipped the balance. The last glimpse. The boy soldier caught sight of her just before the dust swallowed everything. She was standing at the edge, her face calm, almost peaceful. Their eyes met. She didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't smile. But in that silence he understood. This was her verse, her unfinished line. Then the bridge gave way, and she was gone. The question had always haunted her. What do you leave behind when the war finally ends? The desert night had fallen quiet, the kind of quiet that carries weight, as though the air itself knows something has finished. The outpost was secure, the mission marked complete, and names had been transmitted back home. But she sat alone, helmet at her feet, the faint static of the radio whispering like a ghost. The others were scattered, some asleep, some pretending to be. A few tried laughing, but the sound cracked too easily. Victory never felt the way it was written on paper. It came jagged, incomplete, leaving edges sharp enough to cut. She had led them here, step by step, verse by verse, breath by breath. The woman who had once been ignored at the briefing table, dismissed for being quiet, for being slight, for being different, had brought them through storms, through ambush, through betrayal and dust and death. But at what cost? Her rifle lay across her knees. Its weight felt different now. Not heavy, not light, just final, like a sentence ending without a period. She ran her hand along the metal not as a weapon, but as something that had carried a part of her she would never get back. A voice broke the silence. One of the younger soldiers. His words were hesitant. "Ma'am, when you go home, what's the first thing you'll do?" She didn't answer immediately. The question felt larger than it sounded. Home. The word itself was slippery. What home? The apartment she hadn't seen in 3 years. The street where no one remembered her name. Or the grave she hadn't yet visited where her brother slept beneath the earth, his photograph folded deep in her pocket, the one she whispered to before every mission. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something light, something easy, coffee, sleep, music, but the truth pressed too close. Finally, she met his eyes in the dim light. "I'll remember," she said softly. The soldier frowned, confused. "Remember what?" She gave the smallest of smiles. It wasn't an answer he could hold in his hands, but he nodded anyway, as if he understood. Maybe that was enough. The night deepened. Wind scraped across the sandbags. The stars burned overhead, cold and endless. She leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and felt the weight of every face she had carried with her. Those lost, those saved, those who had given pieces of themselves so others could go home. And in that silence she realized something. Her story was never meant to be loud. Not medals, not speeches, not even memory etched into stone. Her story lived in the quiet act of walking forward again and again when no one thought she could. She stood, adjusted the strap of her pack, took one breath, then another. Her steps echoed softly in the sand, fading into the dark. And maybe, years from now, no one would recall her name. No one would know the verses she had carried across battlefields. But the poem would remain. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in her silence she became eternal.